Welcome to Behavioral Grooves, the podcast that explores our human condition. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan, and we talk with researchers and other interesting people to unlock the mysteries of our behavior by using a behavioral science lens.
And today we're going to be talking about how to write better.
Kurt, wait, hold on. Slow down, man. Why are you talking so fast?
Because we're going to be talking about writing for busy readers, and I thought, hey, we have busy listeners as well, so we need to talk about this.
Okay.
What?
Talking fast isn't what's going to help us.
No, it's not.
Just slow down and talk normally. That way they'll be able to understand you as well as it's about being understood, right? And anyway, most groovers are going to be on their treadmill listening at 1.5 times regular speed anyway.
Okay, so what you're saying is that we don't need to speed things up for our busy listeners. We just need to be better communicators.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And by the way, this episode is about writing for busy readers, not so much speeding up, listening for busy listeners. So I think it's a really different topic.
Okay, yes, I'd agree with that. And as much as it pains me to say, I guess you're right. I just won't talk so fast. I know it's hard for me sometimes to admit that you're right, but you're right.
Well, it happens every 10 years, so you can relax about
every
that.
time, and it pains me every time. All right, so our guest today is Todd Rogers, who is a professor of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Todd is also a behavioral scientist who studies how to better communicate with families, students, consumers, employees, and voters.
Along with Jessica Lasky-Fink, Todd wrote a very practical and insightful book, Writing for Busy Readers, Communicate More Effectively in the Real World. Now, we know that groovers will definitely like this book as it provides not just great research, but some very practical tips on how to be a better reader for the real world. It might be one of our top 10 books that we actually read this year, so just definitely want to encourage people to check it out.
Yeah, I definitely think it might make that list. I think one of the key things that I took out of this, and Todd talks about this, is that how we've been taught how to write as a writer from a very young age, about thinking about proper grammar and structure, setting up the situation and laying the groundwork for telling a narrative. But that way of writing might not be the best method for writing in today's world and writing for busy readers.
Yeah, our conversation with Todd focused on what we need to think about when it comes to writing, particularly in business and social media formats. And the focus is on others, not us. So just as Kurt said, it's not about how we structure things for us. It's how we structure them for the reader. And he reminds us that everyone skims.
Everyone skims.
Newsflash. And you have a very limited time and attention span to connect with your reader. So focus on them, not ourselves.
It was a fantastic discussion that jumps from reading habits to principles for effective communication to clearing distractions away and making maps for reading navigation.
Maps?
Mm-hmm. Maps? Yeah, you're just gonna have to listen to find out more about those maps.
Okay, and we invite listeners to check out next week's episode with Gloria Mark, because her research and her book called Attention Span focuses on how to live in a world with a limited attention span of a human being. And it's going to be a really nice tie-in to our conversation with Todd.
It is a really nice tie-in, so really encourage everybody to subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. And with that, we invite you to slow down a bit, grab your favorite book of good, clear, and easy-to-read writing, or a notepad where you can write all those good things in, and listen to our conversation with Todd Rogers.
Todd Rogers, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
It is terrific to have you here. And you're just taking a sip of something. Do you prefer coffee or tea?
Tea.
Love it. Love it. Two drinkers in one day, Kurt. This is
you are a tea drinker, Tim. So you always gravitate now. So you just made a friend there, Todd. You made a friend just by your drink of choice.
Even more tea. You may have seen I stuck something in my mouth. tea with dark chocolate. And so it makes the dark chocolate come to life. It doesn't taste like the chalk it sometimes tastes like. It just flourishes.
All right. So that listeners, we could quit the podcast right now because you just learned a really important lesson in life. Tea and dark chocolate combined makes both better.
You're welcome.
Find your groove with tea and dark chocolate.
Yeah. I like it. There we go. We found the title for the podcast as well. All right. Second speed round question. And as you haven't noticed, these are not really speedy questions. We typically kind of meander around them. So, dinner with your favorite writer or your favorite musician?
I'm thinking because I'm afraid that I'm then going to have to say who my favorite writer is. And you know, I don't know. I mean, Beyonce would be awesome to have dinner with, but yeah, we'll say musician. I don't know. We'll say musician.
I'm thinking, I'm like picturing your brain process going on there, where it's like, oh, I want to say writer, but I'd have to choose. So Beyonce's easy, right?
Sure. Yes.
We didn't think that would be a tough question.
No.
All right.
And I don't think that I've ever seen anyone maybe sort of take the easy way out and say, well, I'm just going to sort of, because I can't really think of any of this category, I'm going to go with this other category.
Well, you guys are behavioral scientists, right? Like you have in one category an easy choice, and then in the other category a conflicted choice. And I am both a cognitive miser and present biased, and so let's go.
Framed beautifully. Boom. Okay. Alrighty. So this should be an easy one. Is it true that everyone skims?
Thank you for calling me out on that. Yes, at some point, but everyone is not skimming everything in every moment. See, for example, the last thing you actually read closely. Everyone does all three. There's three kinds of reading. There's close reading, which is the way we were taught to read, word to word to word to period to word. And we're capable of that. There's skimming, which is jumping around, but usually linearly. Right? Like left to right, then down, left to right. Sometimes we regress, but we're just trying to go as fast as possible and still get the essence. But then there's scanning, which was my favorite part in writing this book with Jessica, was how learning about the vision tracking stuff, where we look at how scanning works, where people dart around for the signposts, headings, pictures, bolded words. And they use it, and the metaphor we use is as a map. Like they use all three. You orient and you scan and then you skim to whatever. And you're like, I really care about this topic. And then you read closely, but then you pop back out and you skim again. So yes, everyone skims, but not all the time.
I think I might skim all the time, but that's a self kind of fault on my own. All right. Last speed round question, Todd. Sentences. You mentioned in the book, sentences are getting shorter. Does that mean that we're just getting less intelligent?
Or we're becoming better writers.
Ooh. There we go.
Sweet.
So, I mean, what we know is what the equilibrium is that the production of sentences is that looking at newspapers over time, looking at novels over time, nonfiction over time, sentences on average have been like pretty steadily and almost in a linear way. Presidential inaugurations is the example we use in the book. It's amazing.
The George Washington, like I started to read that and I'm like going, I don't understand what his first sentence even meant. That was crazy.
Yeah. It's like, what is it? 37 words. And the average sentence length is something like that. And then do we use Biden or Trump? But they both had average sentence length of like 6 words. And it wasn't just that we're cherry picking. It's like a linear straight line. Yeah. So we know the equilibrium is that sentences are getting shorter. Why? It could be because on the demand side or the supply side, it's a combination of both. On the demand side, people probably are more likely, we have evidence that people are more likely to read and more people are capable of reading short sentences. And on the supply side, you can see it's a pretty sensible reaction to write the way people want to read.
Well, speaking of this historical slope, I was fascinated by the trivial tidbit that you bring up that spaces didn't even exist between words until the 7th century. So we've been writing for a long time before we get to the 7th century. There'd been a lot of written word, And there wasn't even a break between the words. There was no, how do we communicate? Oh my God.
It's incredible. So one, I can't remember if we kept the forced joke that we salute the Irish scribes in there. I'm kind of embarrassed in retrospect. Sometimes I thought we were being funny, but in retrospect, I feel like what we were doing was really expressing gratitude too, that words, basically letters, would run continuously. And the belief is, and there's a book called The Silent Reading Revolution, where no one's really sure, but the belief is that reading basically only ever happened out loud until very recently, in the last few hundreds, maybe 500 years. And that when you're reading out loud, you're reading slower. And there wasn't as much need to use formatting and spacing to orient where you are. And it's always for an audience. And so all of these formatting innovations, a lot of innovations, like a paragraph represents a completed idea, a new paragraph, a sentence is an idea, commas, and when a parenthetical opens and closes, all of these are to make reading easier. That was all in the service of, or at least eventually led to, people reading silently. And you can see, I mean, we talk about the printing press, but you can also imagine, in addition to the printing press, that how we read, if we didn't read to ourselves, it was only a social performative act, which is a totally different thing. And so there's a lot of scholarship on this. We don't get into it. All we show is that it turns out it's a lot easier to read when there are spaces than when there are not. And we illustrate that, which it doesn't take much imagination to see that that's obvious.
And the Irish scribes are like, this was how the Irish saved civilization by transcribing a lot of this stuff. Is that the reference?
I don't know if that's the setup to a joke or something, but
no,
all I know is that in the 7th century they trace it back to these Irish monks.
Yeah.
And at the time it's like, that's bizarre. It's kind of like, when you and I were emailing and I included emojis. People will look back and be like, there's this guy, Todd, who in very professional communications broke the norm and started communicating only in hieroglyphic emojis.
Yeah. What the hell?
Why didn't you understand that? That was really clear. Yeah.
But. Okay. So we are having the pleasure today of focusing our attention on your new book called Writing for Busy Readers, and that you co-authored with Jessica Lasky-Fink. Todd, we just want to know what it's like to write a 242-page book called Writing for Busy Readers. We caught the irony in that, Yes, I'm gonna make it even easier for your listeners, our listeners now, to get the joke in that, which is one of the principles out of 6 is less is more. And so we thought the best way to tell people that they should write less is to write a 242-page book about it. Bingo.
Yes. Nice. So the book is one part of the project, and the project has a mission of, we want everyone who writes anything, whether it's forms or websites or emails or texts or reports or assessments or evaluations, anything. And we're all writers. Anyone who writes anything, to have a round of edit where they ask themselves, how do I make it easier for the reader? It's more effective and it's kinder. And we marshal dozens of experiments we've conducted and dozens other people have conducted to make the case for how much more effective it is. And so the book is, I would say, the intellectual hub, but the project is the project. The goal is the goal. The goal is, we want everyone who writes anything to ask themselves, how do I make it easier for the reader? And so, yes, this is a book needs to look like a book, and a one pager of a book would displease Penguin Random House and would also surprise the reader. So in this case, the book looks like a book. The one pager looks like a one pager. The AI tool that we trained GPT-4 on these principles and tuned it for email, it looks like you would expect. You paste an email and it shoots out what it would look like if it was written to be easily skimmed.
So in that, you talk about having this goal of having everybody kind of think about this from a different perspective. What do you find today? Are we doing that okay? Are we doing it horribly? Where are we generally? And I know it's going to range, obviously, but from your research or anything, do you have a kind of where are we on that continuum?
Yeah, we are taught how to read in school, word to word to word, pause at a period, move on. We are taught to write for people who read like we were taught how to read, which is people who are carefully reading it. And often that is prose and paragraphs and arguments, but we're not, we call that writing well. We're taught how to write well. We're not really taught how to write effectively for busy people who are skimming. And per our earlier topic, everyone is skimming some of the time and probably a lot more than we think. And so it's just a different way of writing. And it's a different approach to writing. We're talking with organizations that are the hubs of professional development for teachers of English. And we're trying to get it into English curriculums in high school and college.
Yeah.
We're talking with federal agencies about training the people who write grant requests to make it more accessible. But the idea is we are taught how to read and write in a certain way. And it just turns out that practical writing, that's not the optimal way to write. It's just not as effective.
So in the book, you talked about this already. You said you have, it's broken into a number of principles, and underneath those principles, you have different rules. And so I'm going to ask you the horrible question that is always like, what's your favorite child, right? So do you have a favorite principle, and do you have a favorite rule, or one, maybe not favorite is probably the wrong way. Do you have one that you think is particularly important for, the listeners of this show to take into consideration?
I love all the principles equally.
Love that. And
very
podcast.
Good fatherly of writing the book, fatherly of your principles.
But if I had to choose, and I could only put one in the lifeboat, I will take two. The first is less is more. And the reason I want a second is because I think it's too easy to simplify and misunderstand the essence of what we're saying, to think less is more is the thing itself. Fewer words. We have all these experiments where if you ask people to cut the words in half, dramatically increase people's likelihood of responding. So we did one with a big federal political party with 700,000 donors, arbitrarily deleted every other paragraph, so it didn't even make sense anymore. And then ran an experiment with hundreds of thousands of people in each condition. The one that was incoherent but half as long was raised more money. Similarly, we've done this with emails where we're getting elected officials to respond to a survey, deleting all the middle explanatory paragraph. People think the longer one is going to be more effective, doubles response rates. We've done it with text messages where you remove one out of three sentences and it increases response rates. And it's one, less is more effective. Two, people don't really predict it because we have a really hard time taking other people's perspective. And so that's fewer words, like Strunk and White, who wrote Elements of Style, would say, omit needless words. Easy. Cutting ideas is the harder thing for people, which is just the more you add, the less likely someone is to read and respond. So that's one of them.
I love that, because to that point, it's kind of counterintuitive, what you're talking about. All of the response rate goes up when you're going, but I need to explain this more to them. I need to tell them why they need to respond to this, when what you're saying is, even when it's incoherent, just the fact that it's half as long increases that response rate.
Yeah, I just before this came from teaching a group of government leaders, and we did an exercise where they found an email they had sent in the last month and then rewrote it according to the principles. And it's so fun and hilarious when they realize that it is not just a matter of taste and style. It is more effective and kinder if they write in this different way. And in this case, we're talking just about the first one, which is fewer words. And you see them go from 6 paragraphs explaining why we need you to make a decision to the final, where the final paragraph is, and what do you think? To starting with, I need you to make a decision. I'm about to give you 4 bullet points of explanation. Please get back to me by Tuesday.
Yes. And it works.
It's incredible. I mean, and it's not magic. Like whereas some behavioral science are like, that's incredible. I never would have expected that. This is really like, that's so obvious. I can't believe that someone like my kids are like, I can't believe you would spend your time on that, Dad.
Yeah. But it's interesting because one of the other rules that you write is about making fewer requests. You said cutting out ideas, but you're going, well, isn't it effective for me to put multiple requests in a single email? I should ask you 3 things because then it's all in one as opposed to sending 3 separate emails or different pieces. But again, the research shows not as effective.
No, I mean, in our family of behavioral scientists, the magazine The Behavioral Scientist ran an experiment, which is great, where they asked people on the email list to do 2 things or to do 1 thing. And when they add the second thing, they crowd out doing the first thing, which is like, not like, again, Dad, that's so obvious. Yes. But what it leads to is you've got to prioritize. Like, again, all of these, everything is obvious in retrospect. If one of the items you're asking people to do is more important than all the others, ditch the rest, pocket them until you get a response. I do this now, which is like really hard because I want you to respond to all 3 things that I'm asking you about. But the danger is you'll divert them to the easy one, you'll divert them to a lower priority one, or you'll deter them in the first place from engaging with any of it until I have more time, which is never.
I think we became aware of, or I felt like I became more sensitive to the less is more after we had Leidy Klotz on with his book Subtract, where clearly the whole less is more story comes out big in the world. Okay, so how does this contrast with Cal Newport's deep work thesis?
I love that. Jessica and I, while we were writing this book, I was almost defensively writing in the first draft, responding to this question. Those of you who read the book, and I just want to clear the record, 242 pages includes the footnotes and includes the FAQ and includes a bunch of other.
I'm going to fact check you on it. I've got my paper copy right here.
It is.
Okay,
it's true.
okay,
It's very there. It's right there. It includes
correct.
the index. So you're there.
I want the readers to know that, it's well structured, so it's easy to skim and easy to navigate. So if you're interested in one of the principles, which I will happily tell you the second baby I love the most later, but you can find it in the index. Okay. But so Cal Newport's basic approach is our minds are distracted. Our time is broken up. It prevents us from doing the thing that the human mind is best at, potentially is even made for, but that is focused work. And spending 20 minutes for 3 days on one thing, 20 minutes each day, is worse than spending 1 continuous hour on it. And it's just that clearing all the distractions. Very few of us even have the experience of that because the email pops up. And so Cal Newport makes a really compelling case. And it's inspiring that our minds, we should give our minds a chance to have the quiet focus that happens when we clear ourselves out. Meanwhile, Jessica and I are saying, hey, we are getting bombarded. Your readers are getting bombarded. They're busy. They're skimming. They're trying to move on to the next thing. Their goal when they read what you write is to move on to the next thing, even if they don't understand what you're talking about. And I think that I've expected people to be a little, well, aren't you just submitting to our culture of distraction and busyness? Yeah. And our orientation is our goal is to help writers achieve their goals. And when they know what their goal is with regards to what they want the reader to understand and what they want the reader to do, how do we help them achieve that? In the process, it's also kinder to the reader. And so it's kinder because it saves you time. If I was going to send you a message, takes 3 or 4 minutes to read, I could have just wrote it in a way that you could deal with it in 1 minute. I saved you 3 minutes of time. And so the way we think about it is writing effectively for busy readers is more effective for the writer achieving their goals, but also saves the reader's time, is more respectful to them, so they can actually do the things that they flourish in and that they thrive in and they find fulfilling. And so in a way, it's trying to clear the road for people to do the things with their minds and time that they would like to do, because we inadvertently, unintentionally burden them with unnecessary taxes on their time in the way that we write to them.
So you're giving people time back so they can have those times to have that deep focus, as opposed to 20-minute increments. Now we can hopefully get 40, 60, 70. And as Gloria Mark would say, maybe not more than 90, because we just can't hold focus longer than that anyway. So, but that's what I'm hearing you say. The kinder part of being a good writer is being kind for that reader.
It really is. I don't want to be too grand and spiritual about it, but it's a gift. You let's say we work together and you have to read what I write and you have to process it and you have to respond. I am, by not structuring what I write so it's easy for you to process and make sense of and respond to, I am basically shifting the time burden from me to you. I'm saying the time it would have taken for me to make this easy for you, I'm instead going to shift it to you, so you have to spend that time trying to figure out what I'm doing.
All right. A second lifeboat showed up. So you get to save a second principal. Which one would that be?
Thank God. I hope I didn't know that was a possibility. I would like 4 more to show up. But,
so we cover all 6.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. But I will take, the next one is design for navigation, which is that even if we can't cut what we're doing and we can't change the way we're writing it and we can't change the formatting and we can't make the action easier and so on, what we can do is we can make it easy for a scanner to jump around and navigate. And we have lots of these experiments. Happy to tell the story of some of them, but basically adding headings. We worked with an organization that has 50,000 members. They send monthly or weekly reports to them. And there was 6 paragraphs. Adding a heading every 2 paragraphs, more than double the likelihood that the members would use and respond to anything below the second paragraph. And you can understand they're busy, they're skimming, there's no orientation. Basically designed for navigation, because then you make it easy for people to just find what they're looking for. Jessica and I worked with a school district where they were redesigning their pandemic communications. Some of it was, what's the definition of a close contact? Some of it is, what is the school doing? Some of it is, how do I get tested? All in a continuous prose when different parents have different needs. You want to make it easy for them to navigate and jump around. So the second principle that I would drag onto my lifeboat is design for navigation, because you just want to make it easy for skimmers to find what they want and make it clear what your goal is.
Well, I want to pull a raft up alongside that lifeboat because I would love for you to tell the tappers versus listeners study that comes out of the Tell Readers Why They Should Care chapter, because it's one of our favorites. It's absolutely one of our favorites, and I don't know how many of our listeners are actually familiar with it.
Now, we're going to do it. I've never done this. We're going to do it. Okay.
We're going to do a live experiment right here on Behavioral Grooves. All right.
So I am going to tap out a song, and a song that I expect you to know.
Is it a Beyonce song?
I'm specifically not going to be. It's just, but it could be a popular song. I got to make sure. How am I going to make sure it's a song you know? Okay, but I'm going to do it anyway. Okay. And so I'm going to tap it, and then I want you to see if you can tell me what song it is.
Well, there was a specific song used in the study.
Yeah, but I don't want to do that.
You know
because you guys
know it.
You guys already know it. Yeah. All right. Okay, fine. I'll do it. All right, here we go.
Tim knows all. He's a plethora of musical knowledge.
But that's why this is so fantastic, because it's gonna even I might know a lot of music, but I'm gonna get confused.
Yeah, we'll go. All right, here we go.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Okay, what song? There's no way you don't know this song.
Yeah, I'm sure that we know the song, but by the tapping, I have no idea. Born to Run. I don't know.
Born to Run. No,
I don't know.
That wasn't even close to Born to Run. I
don't even give us a hint. Todd, don't even give us a hint.
There's no way you're going to get there.
It's impossible. It's impossible.
All right, so should I do it? Okay, it was "Teardrops on My Guitar" by the Taylor Swift.
Yeah,
of course.
The only teardrops on my guitar.
Yeah.
Okay. So the study you're describing is about perspective taking and overconfidence in perspective taking, which is the study goes where they ask people to come in and tap out "Happy Birthday to You," "Star Spangled Banner," or "Teardrops on My Guitar," and then they have other people listen to it, and they ask the tapper, "What do you think the chances are that the listener is going to know the song you're tapping?" And almost invariably, it's like 90%. How can you not know? And yeah. How can they not know? And so they say almost everybody. And then the listeners are like, you guys, I have no, I think it might, honestly, I think it might have been 3% was able to detect.
And "Happy Birthday to You" does pretty well.
Yeah. And so when we say emphasize what you think the reader might care about, it really requires working at perspective taking, which is trying to understand what the reader might actually value most. And it's a little more subtle than it sounds, which is, okay, so that study shows we're bad at it. Nonetheless, we've got to try. And the reason, the nuance of the way we describe it, again, Dad, isn't that obvious? Is that for us, the point is to help writers achieve their goals. And from a superficial perspective, we want to make sure the writer's goal is the center. And that means the writer achieves their goal. Then within the content the writer is willing to include, what of that are we elevating as the thing the reader might care about? So we are specifically like, you don't have to change your goal. Your goal is your goal. And even if it's the most boring thing in the universe that nobody cares about, there's some element of it that in rank order, there's the least boring thing in the universe, in your universe of ideas. And so what we want to say is just, you have your content, and towards the end, it's like, okay, of this, what do we think the reader might care most about? It's different than a lot of like the way we think about persuasion and stuff like this, where you actually might enhance it. You might tell more of a story. You might bring things in that other people might care about. Here, in practical writing, people are going to give up before your story ends and move on. And so here we're saying, given the constraints of the things you're willing to say, elevate the part that you think the reader might care best about, even though you're probably not going to be awesome at estimating what that is.
Well, and I think that's the real tricky part, because as you just showed, the tapper's thinking, well, of course they'll get this. So as an author, as the writer, you're going, well, this is the most important part for my listener or my reader, but that isn't always the case. So any hints on how we can overcome that bias that we already have, or is it just, no, we just gotta be thinking about this and try?
I started doing a bunch of, we're turning this into an online course for this organization called Brevity. And I'm doing it with a comedian named Alana Glazer. She did Broad City, and she and I have been talking about this stuff, and Jessica and I didn't even think to talk about this in the book, but she's really big on, for high stakes communications, you get somebody else, an outsider, which we all do. I just hadn't even thought about like the social part of writing. Now, my practical writing of like, what time should we meet for dinner? Still should be short, direct, clear, skimmable. Probably don't need my wife to review it before I send it. But high stakes communications, it actually, an outsider may be a good tool. And Alana's kind of like very big in this. She tells a story about Broad City, her comedy, a very successful comedy show. Big break was Amy Poehler showing up and becoming an actor in it and then becoming the producer. And the first email they sent to Amy Poehler, they labored over and showed to everybody in their family and friends. And it ended up being just 4 sentences. But it was that because they were trying to reach out. We love you. We adore you. You're the greatest. You're a hero. And the 7 sentences they wrote about how much they love her turned into, half of the first sentence, because it's an established fact. Amy Poehler's amazing. She just needs to know you acknowledge it. You don't need to convince her.
I love how that is a component, again, to that point of, we all know we should do it on those important pieces, but it feels like, oh, that's so much extra work in various different pieces. But going back to your premise of being kind to the reader, but not only that, but being more effective, hey, take that extra time, do that extra step in order to make sure that happens. And I think we all can probably take that to heart. as we move forward with it. So, yeah.
I love that. There's another layer to it, which is more effective. It's kinder. It's also more accessible and inclusive. The median U.S. adult, which you may remember from the book, reads at a 9th grade reading level, which means this sentence is probably difficult to read for the median U.S. adult. And that's not, I mean, it is what it is. 20% of U.S. adults read at a 5th grade reading level. So if we are trying to write to a public, the easier we make it to read, the more people for whom it will be accessible. And then for those who are capable of reading it, it's just cognitively taxing and they're more likely to quit if it's hard to read. And so it's kinder, more effective, and more inclusive.
You brought up in the book too, and forgive me if I mistake this, but it was about the government actually mandating that some of the federal government in the level of was back down to 4th or 5th grade. I can't remember exactly what it was, but again, reading and doing that to be inclusive so that everybody was brought into what was being, written by the federal government. And forgive me if I got that all mixed up, but
you got it exactly right. Yeah. It's the Plain Writing Act of 2010. And the goal was all federal communications should be written plainly. I actually think, and Jessica and I have been talking about this and talking with a bunch of federal agencies about this, where we think in a way, this book is a clarification of what does it mean to write plainly. And so we hope that this becomes part of the state and local and federal government way of thinking about, okay, yes, obviously we want to write plainly and the science is advanced. Like and what's important, it's not overly specific. It depends a ton on your context. There is not a single right answer to how to write this form. You know, your what are the expectations? What are the norms? Who's the audience? How have you communicated with them in the past? All these other things sort of weigh into it. But that said, no matter what it is you're writing, it can be written so it's easier. So you should add a round of editing, just make it easier for the reader.
Yeah, my question around this, when I was reading about the Plain Writing Act, what the hell took so long? Like 2010? That's when the government finally gets around to saying, no, let's not throw a bunch of gibberish at our citizenry.
You read George Washington's inaugural opening, right? I mean, come on.
I thought that we've come a long way since then.
I mean, look, it was only 1,300 years ago that they inserted spaces in between words.
Okay.
I also, yes, the Plain Writing Act, why it took so long. It's been a global movement since the 90s. So the US might have been late to adopt it, but it's also, there's a lot of times when it feels like it's a question of taste and style. And that's why the evidence needs to mount and has been mounting.
Yeah.
That it's not really about preference. It can be, but it's not. It's motivated. We are motivated not because we have a artistic preference. We are motivated because it is more effective in achieving our goals as writers. And in the process, it's also pretty nice externality that it's kinder to readers.
Yeah.
All right. So Todd, so the work I do in my day job, I have a company that is a behavioral change and communication agency. We do a lot of communication work inside of organizations. And I think I'm going to gift your book to every one of my clients because I run into this issue all of the time, is that when we're working with them, here's the scenario, right? We have all of this information that my client believes needs to be conveyed to the employees of the organization. And we're telling them, no, we have to, we'll give it to them, but you can't just send it all out in a 30-page document because nobody's going to read it and the objective that you're trying to do. How do I go about, outside of giving them your book, how do I go about getting them to realize less is more?
First, I think you have it exactly right, because perfect for Christmas and for holidays and birthdays and graduations, anniversaries, even just congratulations on completing a podcast.
Order
this
now.
book. This book, yeah, available now while supplies last. Writing for Busy Readers by Todd Rogers and Jessica Lasky-Fink. I want to take a step back, and this is we flirted with this framing throughout the book, And I'm moving more towards thinking this is the central framing of all this work, and I think that it may itself be a compelling way of getting people to accept this approach. It starts with Don Norman, who wrote The Design of Everyday Things, user-centered design. The whole field's orientation starts with if an object that you design is interacted with and then given up because people can't figure out how it works, even if the instruction manual is clear and you can teach people how to use it, it's always the designer's fault. It's never the user's fault. That's it started as radical then. Now I think it's just internalized. That's what design is. We're saying, and I think this is a pretty radical approach. We're saying with regards to writing, if you write something to somebody, they give up on it, they skip over it, they look at it, it's too much, and they don't pull anything away. Often we'll say, well, it was all in there, that was on you. The radical take is it's always the writer's fault. It is always our fault if someone looks at what we send or what we write and moves on without pulling out what we think is the most important information. And that like completely shifting responsibility to the only place that we have control over, which is how we write. And so rather than saying that it's all in there and the reader's got to do what the reader's got to do, the fact is, and we are declaring it now, we are screaming it on this podcast and everywhere we can. Everyone is skimming, maybe not all the time, but everyone is skimming. And that means we need to write in a way that accommodates the way they read. It's always on us as the writer, never on the reader. And so I that's the frame. And I think that's the big frame and it's pretty radical because normally we'd say, well, it was all in there. You should have gotten it.
And to that point, I think there is a big piece of that we can take into organizations and just our everyday kind of writing that we do, is that it is beholden on us. It is our obligation as opposed to the reader's obligation, even when that message is coming from the CEO and everybody should sit down and read the 3-paragraph, however many word long thing and fully understand it. If we know that's not going to happen, then we need to adjust for that. So
I wanted to jump back to the social media stuff because you talked about context. You talked about how context changed, but the principles are really principles, which I loved about the book, and that they're very broadly applicable. But most of us live in a world where there is some social media reading, if not some social media writing. And are there some tips around how to be a good social media writer? Are there certain things that you feel like are more prominent when it comes to thinking about social media posting?
I think the evidence on this, specifically in social media, is less established. And also, I think it's an evolving set of norms and expectations. That said, that's why we think about the principles as one level up from the concrete implementation. One thing that's true is everyone is busy and everyone's goal is to move on as quickly as possible. And your writing begins with what is your goal? What is it you want to achieve? And so there is research that the simpler the language in social media, the more likely it is to go viral. Meaning you just replace unfamiliar synonyms with more familiar synonyms. It's just more likely to be read and shared. It's less cognitively taxing, accessible to more. There are expectations and norms that are evolving in the same way that if I'm writing a 10-page report and people expect it to be 10-page, I can't make it 1 page. I don't think people expect your social media to be 1 sentence. They don't expect it to be maybe sometime, depending on the modality, the mode and all those other things. So I think it's got to look like people expect. But I do think the goal part is particularly interesting. We did not include this in the book, but one of the 5 most retweeted tweets of all time was from Macaulay Culkin. And in the message, if his goal were simply what he writes is, want to feel old, ? Space, next line, today's my 40th birthday, period. That's hilarious because we all know him as a 7-year-old. and so that was one of the 5 most retweeted tweets in the history of Twitter. And his goal was not to inform us that it was his 40th birthday. Because if it were, he should have just said, today I'm 40. His goal was to be amusing and funny. And it wasn't just conveying the efficient transfer of information. And so being clear on your goal helps to shape how you write. And in social media, the goals are a little more multifaceted.
Yeah. Todd, I read somewhere, and I apologize, I don't remember where, but in LinkedIn, in the post, there was a period, I don't know how many years ago, where people started to, instead of writing in paragraphs, basically it was single sentences that, would beforehand have been combined. And what they found is that those were shared more and conveyed more in different pieces. Does that align with just this mapping idea that you talked about before, or is it? I don't know if you have any insight on that or any thoughts.
One of the things about bullet points that we end up spending some time talking about is bullet points can make it easier for skimmers to move on. There's a couple of things that they do. One is they imply a logic. They're all related to the whatever introduced it, the sentence that introduced the bullet points. And if you're not interested in this, whatever that topic is, you can skip all of them. So they let you create this hierarchical logic. Also, they can sometimes make it easier to skim, but skim the content of the bullets because it's just, instead of a wall of words, it's just visually less offensive. But there also is something that is a little trick that I started seeing people do that I think is really brilliant, which is if a bullet point is kind of long, let's say 2 sentences, you still have to skim all of it to figure out what that bullet point was about. It doesn't actually help you pull out what was in it. And so what people have started doing is adding very brief 1, 2, 3 word summary to begin the bullet point.
Titling the bullet point almost.
Right. Yeah. Which then licenses, it then helps people. You just imagine the logic here. We have 5 bullet points. One is about scheduling, cost, appearances, whatever. And then there's 2 sentences in each bullet point. If I'm not interested in any of the planning, I can skip all of them. But if I am interested in some of it, I gotta have to go through, read all of it. But if I give you a little heading on what it's about, then I can say, I can skip that and that. And so it's another way, again, it's just another innovation on how do we make it easier for readers, help them move on because they're going to move on. And if they don't move on, you're burdening them.
So imagine we were moving on to a desert island and, alone. You have a year on a desert island, Todd, and you've got the opportunity to take 2 musical artists with you. Not the actual people, but their catalogs. You get the whole catalog, everything that they've ever written, recorded, all that kind of stuff. Which 2 artists would you take with you?
You get to tap out the beats as you're sitting there to the songs.
So I'm going to want them to have a deep library.
Yeah.
Because see, that's a little hack. If I were just to choose Milli Vanilli, I would just have 3 songs.
Yeah. And so are you novelty seeking? Or are you going to go after variety?
I'm going for variety. So Beatles are going to have to be one, even though I don't know that if you asked me for a favorite song that even any of theirs would be in the top 10. They're great, but they're not. And then I'm going to do a mashup of contemporary. This is Beyonce and Taylor Swift summer. So I'll go every other album between the 2 of them.
Oh, that's kind of clever.
I like that.
Okay.
Oh, I like that mix up. There you go.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Fascinating.
It is that summer.
All right. Well, with that, Todd, we thank you. This has been very fascinating. It is a absolutely lovely book. We have 50 more questions. So less is more on questions too. That's a lesson that us as podcasters have to take because we didn't get nearly through all of them, but we thank you very much.
Oh, it's super fun. Nice chatting with you. And next time we'll get through the other 40 questions.
Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from our discussion with Todd, have a free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into our very busy and distracted brains.
There it is.
There it is.
That's the human condition, man.
Yeah, it is a very common aspect about how much we are taking in at this point. And I love this conversation with Todd because it fits with what I'm seeing, not just in the corporate world, but in social media, with everything that we're doing. It really matches up. And I think it's really important. And particularly with a lot of people who aren't necessarily that good at writing for a world where we're getting 34, gigabytes of information presented to us every day, or, we spend however much hours in front of a screen and we are, learn more in a day than we learned in a year when we back in 1850s or whatever it is,
Well, those are, I want to get to the real world applications, but just give us, you did some research on this and you've got some really tasty bits here. So let's just hear some of the really wonderful things that you can use with your next trivial conversation.
The Trivial Pursuit thing. All right. So this is some research, some of it coming from the University of California, San Diego, basically where it says the average American consumes about 34 gigabytes of data and information every day. That translates into approximately about 100,000 words between radio, podcast, television, web, print. And that is based on data gathered in 2008. In 2023 and beyond, when this is going to be presented, I can only assume that has gotten much, much worse. So yes, we're busy. Yes, we are having all of this information presented at us, and we have to be able to not read everything in its full entirety, because we would be bogged down. We wouldn't be able to actually operate given that.
So give me an example from the real world of a company that is needing to communicate with their employees, and they have a lot of important information, but they're not doing it well. and we won't name names.
I was going to say, I can't name names. This is what we do. This is the work that so I will do an interesting kind of analogy. What is it when you combine things together?
Combination?
No, well, I'm going to take a bunch of clients that I've worked with, and I'm going to just mash them all together and talking about this.
Sounds like an amalgam. You're going to amalgamate.
That's the word that I was looking at. Yes. So here's a common situation. We do a lot of work, a lot of work. Vast majority of our work is around incentives and reward and recognition programs, mostly for salespeople. And I hear this not once, not twice, but multiple times over the course of the past 25 years, is that we talk about how you need to improve your communication, and people go, but this is important for people and they're really motivated to read it, so they will read whatever we send out. And I have to, push back my gag reflex and be a good corporate person and say, maybe we need to rethink that assumption. This idea that just because it's how they get paid and it is important, and yes, they are motivated to read it, and yes, there is a more likelihood that they're going to read a communication about their incentive plan than, say, about the new HR policy on footwear or something along that line, right? But the assumption that they're not busy and they're not going to skim, as Todd talks about, that they're not going to be concerned about how it is structured so that they can easily understand the key concepts within it, is just foolhardy. And yet we see it way too often. And not that every client that we work with does this. Many of them are actually coming to us because they realize they need to do a better job on this. But there are people within that organization, oftentimes high-ranking sales VPs, who are going, why do we have to spend money on this? Because this is something they should be. We're telling them how they get paid so that they get rewarded. And you're going, yes, you are. You have to do that well.
Yeah. So you're saying that the format of the information makes a big difference in the readability and then the ability to understand, and then the ability to actually execute on that.
Well, it's what Todd talks about. It's this idea that when we have information that is being presented to us, we are very busy. Our attention span, as we'll talk with Gloria next week about, has been diminishing in our world from what it was 20, 40 years ago in the way that the world operates. And so we've kind of grown accustomed to that. So if I don't present the information that is needed, particularly if I am trying to drive a particular behavior change within a segment of the employee population, and I want to do it by putting together an incentive plan that people need to understand, first, how that plan impacts them, but two, what they need to do differently in order to maximize that. I can't put that out in a 20-page Word document that is 12, Times New Roman font that has, 10 different tables in it with mathematical equations. As much as I would like to be able to think that I've hired really intelligent and smart people, which I have,
sure,
they just don't have the time or the wherewithal or the energy to be able to do that. So, as Todd says, the responsibility is on the writer, or it is on the organization. It is upon the incentive compensation team to be able to do that. It is on the HR director. It is on the manager who is leading his team and wants to get them to do something different. This is all about how they need to understand what is important, what are the goals, and then take all of the tips that Todd talked about and put them into play.
You and I have done a lot of research on with people, the subjects being the incentive users, the people who are in the field actually earning the incentives.
Yes.
And one of the most common troubles that they have is, I didn't know that was in the plan. Or I don't know how it works. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
And the people who have designed these incentive plans are very thoughtful and they're very bright.
Yes.
And it has more to do with the map than it has to do with the content itself. That they might write all the right things, but unless you lay it out in a way that is going to be understandable for the skimmers and the scanners and the glancers and the I've got a busy life people, then we're not going to effectively communicate with them. And I love the way Todd's book laid out these beautiful visual examples when he had comparing on opposite pages the differences between here's all the raw content laid out in a good way, and then here's all the raw content laid out in a great way. And you go, wow, instantly gravitate toward just let's focus on how to get better.
So going back to that research that we've done, so there is the common thing. I didn't know that was in there. I don't know what this is. What's even worse is when people misunderstand. So in other words, they are assuming that the incentive plan is designed one way, and in fact, it isn't. And oftentimes they're anchored in on a plan that was 3 years ago, and they've made changes, and those changes just haven't been called out. So this idea of what you're just saying, this mapping, this idea of the graphical design of your information is really important to call attention to. These are the key concepts that we want you to do. Legally, companies have to, every year present an incentive plan and get people to sign off on it. But they legally don't have to do that in a good way, right? I mean, it can be a horrid way.
Right.
That's right. So, but to do it in a good way. So in other words, I can put this change and it's on page 5 of a 12-page document, buried down in this paragraph about how we change these different things. When instead what you need to do, you need to highlight that. Here are the 4 key changes in 2024 around our incentive plan. And, oh, by the way, here's what that means. And, oh, by the way, here's a graphical visualization for what that means for you. Yes. I can look at that and I go, oh, got it, done. And even if I don't read any of the detail, I know what I'm supposed to do, or at least have that general knowledge about what has changed.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that my wife is a communication professional.
Yes.
She is responsible for the internal communication at a very large company. And when we talked about Todd's book and she glanced through it, she's like, I don't really see anything here that's like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that, right? That a communication professional knows all of it. And then she followed that up with, and it's laid out in a beautiful way that I really get it. Like instantly, I can understand. Even the book itself is laid out beautifully. So like she was taking it, she bought copies for her team. And, she was like, everybody needs to read this.
I mean, that's what I taught, when I talked to Todd, I go, I need to send this book to my clients.
All your clients.
Right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's so true because I think we all know communication is important. We all know that people are busy, but we don't always put those two together in a way that is really impactful. And we understand that, yes, this is super important. So, all right, Mr. Houlihan, is there anything else, or should we talk really fast and wrap this up?
There are so many more things we could talk about because it's a great book and it's full of great tips. I just want to encourage everybody to go out and read it.
Yeah. All right. So let's wrap this grooving session up. Again, thank you, Todd. You are a fantastic guest. We hope to have you on again. And as Tim mentioned, everybody, please, if you have any type of writing that you have to do in a corporate or social or whatever situation, read this book. It's a really good book and it will help you. It has lots of different tools, tips and hints. And if you like it, and you like this podcast, share us on your social media, share us on your, write a nice short and brief and very effective social media post that says Behavioral Grooves is one of the best podcasts you can ever listen to get practical advice.
Thinking about it from your reader's perspective, not your perspective. Absolutely. And with that, Groovers, we hope that you take these wonderful messages from Todd and his co-author, and it helps you this week to go find your groove.